Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm so happy that you're here, but also, do you like the new intro? I'm super anxious about changing anything on my platform, so this is why this is a whole thing. But I am super excited that you're here because today it's another impact video and we're going to be talking about fast fashion, or generally fashion, but specifically fast fashion because that is like... Ugh. This was one of the videos that was quite requested for me to do, and bear in mind that I may not be able to get through everything that is wrong with this industry. There's been written like huge projects and reports, and there's been made documentaries about aspects of fast fashion. So expecting me to get through all of it in a YouTube video is perhaps a little far-fetched, but I will do my very best to give you guys a great overview of what some of the components are and why fast fashion is so polluting. And generally, I hope this can inspire further research on your own, or you can watch some of my other videos where I go into detail with some of these things a little bit more. I will leave the videos that are relevant to this one down below if you're interested in knowing more. But let's get started. First of all, what is fast fashion? What defines fast fashion? This is a term that generally refers to the pace with which something in the fashion industry goes from being in to out of style. It's also a term that refers to the process and the speed of the process from which a product goes from being an idea to going into stores. In fast fashion, this all happens, you know, a style going from being on the idea stage to being an actual product in a store. It takes 30 days. This industry moves by incredibly fast, which is why it's gotten the appropriate name, fast fashion. The term also generally refers to or makes you associated with low-cost items, and the reason why these items are so cheap is because everything moves by incredibly fast. So what brands are fast fashion? I'm not going to make a list, it would literally take forever. But if there is a chain store, it's generally fast fashion. If they have shops all around the globe, it's generally fast fashion. If it's found in a mall, it's generally fast fashion. And if you're old school and watching a good old-fashioned try-on haul from like the YouTube era 5-6 years ago, then those things will generally also be fast fashion. Not my thrift hauls though, we're good. The big issue also for this video is the fact that fast fashion is all around us, and for a lot of people it's the only available way of buying clothes. However, this relatively cheap and widely available way of consuming garments comes with an impact that is in no way, shape or form small. I would also like to point out before we move forward that this is not intended to shame anyone whose only choice is to buy fast fashion items. I am not here to do that. I am here to address that there is a huge problem with overconsumption and hyperconsumption connected to fast fashion. This is not a way of shaming out those people who have no real means of doing things differently, who perhaps do not have thrift shops available to them, or perhaps do not have the budget to afford sustainable clothes. This is not meant to shame anyone in that economic position. That doesn't make any sense. That has nothing to do with sustainability. This is me trying to point out that there is a big difference between need and want. This is a critique of how the fashion industry is nudging consumers into buying much more than they need. It's not a critique of people who has to support this industry because they don't have any other choice. I think it's important to recognize that there is privilege within the ability to choose. So now that I've pointed that out, I hope that you will see the intention of this video and what it's actually meant to be doing. The clothing industry is among the 5 biggest polluters in the world. The fossil fuels industry being number 1 and animal agriculture being number 2. The fashion industry produces 10% of all humanity's carbon emissions and is the second largest consumer of the world's water supply. That's because it takes 2,700 liters of water to produce one cotton t-shirt and reproduce 80 billion pieces of new garments every single year. That is actually 400% more clothing than the amount we consumed 20 years ago. One of the reasons why is because fast fashion brands produce new seasons and new collections of clothing all the time. While some brands put out between 15 and 25 new collections a year, other brands produce 50 collections a year. This idea of something being untrendy is completely constructed. It is an artificial idea that is only there to make you feel inadequate in what you already have, and it's a way of making you purchase new, better things to be adequate again. It's In fast fashion, consumers are nudged into buying new things to continuously update themselves. And that is truly a witness to how the fast fashion industry has created a problem and then simultaneously created the solution to that problem. Cotton is still the single most used materials for clothing, although the use of several synthetic materials is collectively bigger. So let's talk about both. Actually, I already have a complete video about cotton, so if you're more interested about cotton, I think you should go and watch that. So for this video, I will only say this. Cotton is the world's biggest consumer of pesticides and insecticides. The conventional cotton industry uses 18% of the world's pesticides and 25% of the world's insecticides. There's so much more to go over when it comes to cotton, so I'll suggest to watch that video. Okay. Synthetics. Synthetic materials are often just made from plastic, aka crude oil, aka the most unsustainable polluting industry on the planet. However, producing polyester actually requires much less water and land than producing cotton. Furthermore, the amount of wastewater when producing polyester is much lower than producing cotton, and there's also no need for pesticides. But in 2015, polyester produced for clothing emitted 282 billion kilos of CO2, which is nearly 3 times more than cotton, because the energy required to produce polyester and the greenhouse gases emitted make it a high-impact process. In 2015, more than 330 million barrels of oil were used to make polyester and other synthetic textiles, and that's the equivalent of 21,000 Olympic swimming pools filled with crude oil. And that's kind of an odd comparison, but I appreciate it. In terms of trash, there's tons of trash within the production of new garments, and we can talk about this again for ages, but I'm going to bring up 2 different types of trash that you perhaps do not know about. First of all, whenever clothing are shipped from the factory to the store, they all arrive in individual plastic bags. And those plastic bags are obviously discarded before the clothing head out into the store. So there's an individual plastic bag for each new piece of clothing every single time. Furthermore, the impact of disposable hangers is also something to consider. Each individual new piece of clothes is also shipped with its own plastic hanger, and when those clothes are unpacked at the store, those hangers get tossed. As a result, 85 billion hangers are trashed every single year. In volume, that's the equivalent of dumping 294 Big Bens into landfill. Again, I know, odd comparison, but it does put things into perspective, right? I would also like to talk about water, because the fashion industry and the fast fashion industry has a huge impact on the world's water supply. As of now, only 3% of the world's water is actually drinkable, and 2/3 of that is inaccessible in frozen ice and glaciers. So that leaves only 1% of the world's water accessible and drinkable. And the fashion industry is polluting it. The documentary River Blue actually did an amazing job at uncovering the extent to which the fashion industry is destroying water, and they actually called it hydrocide. That's because fast fashion factories have no wastewater management and flood toxic chemicals into people's freshwater supply through anonymous pipe systems that can never be led back to them. The fashion industry also uses tons of harsh chemicals and dyes to make the clothes have a certain look or a certain color, and those chemicals will never ever biodegrade. They are synthetic often, so they will bioaccumulate, and we talk more about this in the impact of makeup video, which I think is really important in this context. These chemicals, toxins and dyes are flushed straight out into people's freshwater supply, and that has huge consequences for animals, for nature, and for human health. And speaking of humans, it's not only the environment that's suffering from this overconsumption of clothes, it's also people. To keep production costs of garments down, a lot of fast fashion, all fast fashion, have outsourced their production from their original countries to areas and countries that are deeply affected by poverty and thus have lower wages. Those companies are places like China, India, Cambodia, and Bangladesh. Bangladesh being the biggest fast fashion capital in the world and where most of our stuff is produced. The fast fashion industry is also notorious for sweatshops, and I feel like you can't even say fast fashion without also saying sweatshops. A sweatshop is a factory where the workers are paid very, very low wages and are often working in poor and even dangerous working conditions. In 2013, the building known as the Rana Plaza in Bangladesh, a factory used by several fast fashion clothing brands, collapsed and killed over 1,100 people. And there are many other instances where factories have malfunctioned or collapsed, primarily due to poor construction, to lack of regulation, and to falsified building permits. The fast fashion industry is also notorious for forced labor and forced child labor. Furthermore, the average wage for a garment worker in Bangladesh is $25 a month, where the average living cost for living in Bangladesh is actually twice that. And because of this industry, only 2% of garment workers in the world are paid a fair, livable salary. To put this into perspective, in 4 days, a fast fashion CEO will make what a garment worker will make through their entire lifetime. Garment workers have also been documented to work up to 140 hours of overtime each month, working until 2 a.m. and they're not additionally compensated for overtime or provided with healthcare or even clean drinking water. Actually, it's not a very long time ago where over 700 garment workers were fired from Mango sweatshops because they requested clean drinking water. Moreover, the majority of garment workers are women, about 85% are women. And sexual assault, discrimination, and sexually humiliating punishments are not uncommon in sweatshops. And the structures in place in these areas where fast fashion brands have built their factories make it intensely difficult for garment workers to fight for their rights, to quit, or to discuss salary or work hours. To put this into perspective, because perspective is always great, but fast fashion CEOs have made billions of dollars, literal billions of dollars, selling consumers fast fashion items that they don't even need, producing much more clothes than anyone could ever possibly consume. And they've been doing so by selling all these clothes intensely cheap, harming the environment and keeping garment workers in a state of modern slavery. Also, current side note, tons of fast fashion brands have postponed or even cancelled the payment of their garment workers during COVID, because they don't want to sell the clothes, because they couldn't keep the stores open because of lockdown. So the richest people in the world have cancelled the payment of the people who produced their clothes. This has been going on since March and it's still happening. Then there is the impact of how we use our clothes and not just how they're produced, even though the production in and of itself is just... Because a large part of our clothing contains synthetic materials today, washing a load of synthetic laundry will actually release up to 9 million pieces of microplastic. Microplastic has a huge role to play when it comes to ocean pollution, and they are so tiny, that they are not necessarily always filtered in waste management plants, and they will thus be flushed straight out into the oceans. Today, 31% of all ocean pollution is actually caused by microplastic, although it doesn't all come from synthetic clothing. There are tons of other places microplastic come from as well, but synthetic materials, as we just saw, play a huge role in the fashion industry. It's something that we use so much of, so it does come with significance. Another thing is that whenever we use an electronic dryer, we actually double the impact of that laundry load because it requires a lot of electricity to keep running. It's actually very energy intensive, and thus it does come with a carbon footprint. So air drying your clothes is much more sustainable. I would also like to talk more about trends. The documentary The True Cost, which I, by the way, recommend everyone to watch, puts it so brilliantly by pointing out that it is not the consumer's demand that has turned the fashion industry into one of the most polluting and wasteful industries in the world. This development is not something that just happened overnight. But if you look at the consumption of clothes 20 years ago and now, there's a 400% increase in the way we buy clothes. So obviously something happened. Then there's clothing maintenance. One of the reasons why we bought so much less clothes in the past is because repairs were much more normalized. And also repairs and maintenance places were much more readily available. So pursuing a more sustainable lifestyle actually means relearning some of these old traits and finding pleasure in fixing something that would otherwise have gone to landfill or incinerators. However, it seems almost dystopian that repairs of something that you already have is actually more expensive than simply just going out and buying new things. So repairing your stuff comes with some sort of economic or financial privilege that some people just can't afford, and they have to simply buy new things every time they break, because repairing something, having it sent to a repair shop, is more expensive than buying something from new. So, zero waste tip. Learning how to sew and mend is such a good idea. I think it was also the True Cost documentary, again, watch it, it's brilliant, that labeled fast fashion clothes as disposable, which is exactly what it is. Because we throw away everything the second it breaks, and that is not necessarily on the consumer only, that is also on the brand, because with costs being so low of many fast fashion clothes, the quality aren't amazing either. And when the quality aren't great or the materials aren't great, aka some synthetic materials for instance, it's really, really difficult for consumers to fix their broken garments and their clothing and shoes and stuff like that. So often consumers, even though they want to repair things more, are forced to throw something away. What happens to clothing then when we throw it away? The average American now generates 82 pounds of textile waste each year. That adds up to more than 11 million tons of textile waste from the US alone. Historically, clothes has been something we've held onto for a long time, but with cheap clothing now abundantly available, we're beginning to see things we wear as disposable. In total, up to 85% of textiles end up in landfill each year. That's enough to fill the Sydney harbour annually. And while a mere 20% of garments ends up in the recycling system. In landfills, clothing, even natural materials won't ever biodegrade because landfills are tombs for trash. So when we put even natural materials, even food waste in a landfill, we instantly dump new trash on top of it. And that removes all air and that leaves out the possibility for decomposition. So it will simply just lie there in the landfills and emit methane. Then there are recycling scams like the ones promoted by H&M. They had this campaign, I think it's still going on. I think it's a permanent thing where they tell you that you can come in with bags of old clothing and then they will recycle it, and in return you will get a voucher to shop more in H&M. However, it has been proven that this recycling campaign is... Scam is a hard word, but I also think it's appropriate to use. Their own sustainability department in H&M estimates that a roughly 30% of clothing that is received by them ends up being recycled. However, other sources say that it is less than 1%. One of the reasons why there is such a huge difference between those two numbers is because that H&M actually ships a lot of the clothes that they get as donations further on to thrift shops, and I guess they simply just call that recycling. But clothing that gets shipped to charity shops then is reused, right? Well, I love thrift shops, I love secondhand, and I love everything about that. But with fast fashion being so abundant, with clothes being made in those vast quantities and being donated in those same quantities, thrift shops cannot keep up. Thrift shops have to discard tons of things every single day because there's simply, first of all, not room in their shops, and a lot of the clothes are also made so poorly or in so poor conditions that they cannot be resold. Again, because the materials are poor, because the construction is poor, because the cheap price. Thrift shops also send clothes to landfill when they cannot sell them. So is there nothing the individual consumer can do? Well, of course, there are tons of things that individuals can do, but we also have to acknowledge that if we have to change the entire structure of fast fashion, the change cannot come solely from consumers, but we have to work in the trifecta of politics, industry, and consumers. We have to work with regulations and laws that need to be put in place, policies need to be made to change these things. But there are things that we can do right now and then look at all the other things simultaneously. Okay. It's all, I really don't want to be discouraging when I'm talking about how we can change this, and I feel like the simple answer that is just, well, we cannot do that alone. See ya, good night. It's a little bit discouraging, and I don't want it to be like that. But we have to acknowledge that consumers cannot necessarily do anything themselves, but we can use our voices to push for change. That is already happening tons of places, and we just need to push more. Okay, but here's some of the things that we can do as consumers as well. By doubling the life of clothing from 1 to 2 years, we can help reduce emissions from clothing production and disposal by as much as 24%. Then you can boycott fast fashion brands and communicate to them via email or via social media that you want them to change and that you simply do not think that what they're doing is okay and their practices is the reason for your boycott. Then you can support sustainable and green ethical clothing companies instead. Some companies, for instance, work in the same areas as the fast fashion companies, but help to build up the communities rather than exploit them. By, for instance, making education widely available, by paying fair wages, stuff like that. Then we can use what we already have instead of buying unnecessary amounts of new clothing and fix it when it breaks. You can also support charities and organizations that actually fight for garment workers' rights, like the War on Warrant. You can also do social media work, like support the #PayUp campaign that pushes companies to actually pay their workers something. A really important one is acknowledging our responsibility as consumers and talk to other people about fast fashion and get the conversations going about what we can do differently and spreading the information about the hidden impact of things that we wear every day and perhaps take for granted. Then you can of course shop vintage secondhand or pre-loved. Ooh. Then we can avoid trends. I know this for a fact happened to me tons of times previously prior to zero waste, but I would buy so many things I thought were so cool because I saw them online, and 2 months later I thought it was hideous. Because the trend has sort of passed and it had become untrendy. So if you really want to explore some trends, find sustainable ways of doing so, for instance by DIYing something or buying something secondhand. But generally try to build your wardrobe on timeless, good quality pieces that you can fix and that will never go out of style. And this is also one of my favorites, but you can arrange clothing swaps with friends, family, or even organize something on social media. Perhaps social distancing is not the time to do this right now because of COVID, but once suddenly the dust settles, yay, clothing swaps is one of my favorite things. You can also go to flea markets, but generally clothing swaps is so cool because you get to go home with tons of new clothing and you didn't spend any money, you didn't support any fast fashion brands. What's not to love? Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you liked it. I hope this gave you a good overview of some of the aspects of fast fashion and why it is so polluting and so unethical. I really love to hear your opinions down below, so let me know what you think, or perhaps tell me what you have done to boycott fast fashion or to combat unsustainable fashion habits. I would love to hear you out. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day and take really good care of yourselves. Until next time. Bye! Thank you so much for watching this video, and also a special thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys help me create green zero waste content and I love you guys. You can find the links to my social media accounts down below and the link to my Patreon on this screen. Bye!